Good morning. It's very good to be here with all of you. I'm very happy to be able to be your speaker this morning. And as you can see from the board, we're going to be continuing our series through Ecclesiastes here. This is my first time going through Ecclesiastes, but Aaron and Trevor have done great jobs so far going through their sections, and I hope that we can continue to keep that going and that I can do justice for that as well. If you want to go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Ecclesiastes, the second chapter, we're going to begin our reading there in verse 18, and we're going to read through the end of the chapter there. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, beginning in verse 18, Solomon writes, "Then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. For what has man for all his labor and for the striving of his heart with which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful, and his work burdensome. Even in the night his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity. Nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. For who can eat or who can have enjoyment more than I? For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give it to him who is good before God. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind." And before we jump into breaking down this section here, I wanted to quickly recap what we've talked about, if maybe this is the first time that you've been here and we're talking about Ecclesiastes. In this book so far, Solomon has gone on a journey. He's looking for the meaning of life. He asked the question, is there any profit for anything that we're doing, any of this work that we're doing in our life? And he throws himself into all these many experiments to try and find the meaning of life. He looks into wisdom and foolishness. He looks into all the pleasures that you could imagine under the sun. And in our last section that Aaron talked about, he even looks at wisdom and foolishness a second time and considers it, wondering if this is where the meaning of life is found. But in the end, the final conclusion that he comes to in Aaron's section and leading into ours is simply in Ecclesiastes 2 and 17. He says, "Therefore I hated life, because the work that was done under the sun was distressing to me. For all is vanity or vapor and grasping for the wind." And this morning we're going to kind of continue that same train of thought and talk about Solomon hating life. And we're going to see the one thing, or one very specific thing that he hated about life was the work that he did in his life up to this point. So number one, hating work in verse 18. Solomon says, "Then I hated all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun." And Solomon hates the labor. He hates all the work that he's done up to this point because his work and his toil, all the things that he'd done so far, was just another area that he was looking for the meaning of life. He thought, maybe I can find meaning in my work and I can find purpose. But again, he only finds vapor and grasping for the wind, as he says. And this passage heavily emphasizes that this is work that he's doing under the sun. In verses 17 through 22, as we just read, Solomon uses the phrase "under the sun" 5 times, and he uses the word vanity or vapor 4 times. And this emphasizes that this is human and physical and earthly work that we're talking about. We're not talking about spiritual work or the work of the church right now. This is physical, everyday work that we're doing. And we're also looking at a very negative passage again here. Solomon is writing from an under-the-sun perspective, as Aaron put it on Wednesday. Aaron said on Wednesday, as long as we look at things in an under-the-sun perspective, we will hate life. And that's what we see with Solomon as well. And Solomon came to that conclusion because he says we're all going to die the same in the end. So what's there to do other than to hate life, because it's vapor and grasping for the wind. But now Solomon is going to show us how living under the sun leads to our first conclusion here as well, that hating life under the sun causes us to hate the work that we do under the sun. If there's no point to life, then there's no point to the work that we do either. There's nothing left to do than to hate the work that we do as well. And we're going to talk about how and why he comes to this conclusion in Ecclesiastes as well. But right here, I want to stop and quickly answer the question that I had. Many of you might have as well. Is what did Solomon know about work? Was Solomon really a hard worker in Ecclesiastes as well? We look at him and we might think he was the king over Israel. He probably had all these pleasures and riches, but the Bible does tell us that Solomon was a worker. He was a hard worker. For one, being the king of Israel was not, I imagine, a cushy job for Solomon. He was a very wise man, and it seems like he was very involved as a king. He was one of the best kings of Israel, we're told in the Bible. On top of that, he was a businessman. Ecclesiastes has told us all about the servants and the animals and the land that Solomon had and he was over. And it tells us that he was good at managing all this. He was a good and involved businessman. And then on top of that, he has fully buried himself in this experiment that we find in Ecclesiastes. He is fully invested in finding the meaning of life, and he's willing to work hard to find that answer as well. But more importantly, Solomon understood enough about work to see work for what it really is and to write about what it really is here in Ecclesiastes. He says that work is vapor and it's grasping for the wind. Philip Ryken writes, "If anything is striving after the wind, it would have to be the labor and travail of our everyday work. You work away day after day, but what do you have to show for all your efforts? Another day working is another day wasted." But why is that the case for us, and why is that the case for Solomon? What's there to hate about our work? What's so bad about it? And why is it grasping for the wind? Well, Solomon kind of explains this with two main complaints that I want to look at. The first being that your work isn't always yours. Ecclesiastes 18 through 21, Solomon says, "Then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil." Solomon says that the work is hateful, the work is vanity, because I have to leave everything that I've earned to someone else that's coming after me. And that brings us to conclusion number 2. Everything that we work for does not belong to us. It does belong to us right now, but that's just a short while. That's a vapor, as Solomon says. Maybe tomorrow it won't belong to us. It'll belong to the man that's coming after us, and so on it goes down the line. For today, Solomon's conclusion means that we can spend our whole life building something under the sun, whether that's a home or our career or a fortune, but in the end, we can't take any of that with us. We might even lose it before we die. We don't know when we'll lose everything that we've worked for, but sooner or later, we'll have to leave it all behind, and others will be found owning the things that we worked so hard to build, and everything we gain will be gone. That's a very negative passage here in Ecclesiastes, but Solomon, it's true. We don't get to own anything forever. And Solomon says that the slap in the face on top of all of this to him is that everything that he's worked for could be given to the biggest fool in the world, and he has no say over it. There's nothing he can do, and this man has done nothing to earn or deserve anything that he's given. And we see Solomon wrestle with this in these verses. It's almost funny to see him kind of try to elevate himself above this other man, to say that this man is not worthy of anything that's been given to him, when really Solomon was the same way. He was given everything by his father that he didn't work for, but here he is doing kind of the same thing. In verse 19, he says, "I have shown myself wise under the sun, but of the man who will come after me," he says, "who knows whether he will be wise or a fool?" And knowing Solomon, he was the wisest man in the world, so clearly whoever's coming after Solomon will be a fool compared to him. Verse 21, Solomon says, "There is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill." And seemingly he seems like he's talking in general terms here, but it's pretty easy to see that Solomon's talking about himself here. He says, "I have worked with wisdom, knowledge, and skill," not like this other man that's coming after me. Verse 22, he says, "Yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it." And here we see Solomon he's really wrestling with this idea of having to give up everything and leave it all behind. And we can almost see him thinking, maybe all this would be bearable if I could just pick the person who's going to have everything that I worked for. If I could just pick a wise and a skillful and a hardworking man to leave everything to, then just maybe I could leave it all behind, willingly and with a smile. But we know that's not the case. No amount of a hardworking man will ever make it easier to leave behind everything that he's worked for. And that's not the case for us either. We don't get to pick what happens to our things after we're gone. We don't get to pick and choose who takes control of it. Instead, it's just gone in an instant. It is vapor in our lives. And Solomon says about all this, he says not only that it's vanity, not only that it's a vapor, but he says that this is vanity and it's a great evil, meaning that it's unfair, it's wicked, and he says it's grievous to him. And if we're looking at this just from an under-the-sun perspective, if we're looking at it in an earthly perspective, Solomon's right. This is unfair. This is wicked to do, to take everything that we've worked so hard for and just give it to someone else. That's not right. But as Solomon has already discovered in Ecclesiastes, we can't control our lives with under-the-sun wisdom. We can't control our lives with earthly wisdom. Death doesn't care about our earthly wisdom or the work that we've done under the sun. Aaron said on Wednesday again, he said, human wisdom may save you some humiliation and stress, but it doesn't save you from heartache and death. And that statement is proved by Solomon immediately in verse 20. He says, therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. So human wisdom cannot save you from death or the heartache that it brings. But Solomon is also heartbroken here. He's also despairing because he still hasn't answered the first question that he tried to answer in the book of Ecclesiastes. In chapter 1, verse 3, he says, what profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? And then in chapter 2 and verse 22, we find that he's still right back at the beginning. He's still at square one here. He says, for what has man for all his labor and for the striving of his heart with which he has toiled under the sun? So far, the only answer we found is that there is no profit. There's only vanity and grasping for the wind. Because we can't take anything with us that we've worked so hard for, and it's all going to a person that's going to come after us anyways. So what's the point of anything? Solomon's second complaint here, he says the work is hard. Verse 22 and 23, he says, for what has man for all his labor and for the striving of his heart in which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful, and his work burdensome. Even in the night his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity. And Solomon's description of work here, it makes me think of physical labor that he's doing. It makes me think about working in the heat of the day and all this. And he says that the work is toiling and burdensome. And that is part of the work that he's doing. But he also says that it can have an effect on our hearts and our minds. He calls this striving of the heart in verse 22 there. And then on top of that, he says all that carries into the night and it affects your sleep. You can't even sleep at night because his heart takes no rest. So his second complaint here is that not only is the work unfair, he says it's a great evil and vapor, but he also says it's hard to do. It's not even easy to do on top of everything that's horrible that we've talked about. It takes a physical, a mental, and emotional toll on us. So conclusion number 3, the only thing worse than doing work under the sun that seems profitless and pointless is doing hard, sorrowful, and burdensome work under the sun that seems profitless and pointless. But that's exactly the type of work that Solomon has been doing so far in the book of Ecclesiastes. He's doing all this work under the sun to look for the meaning of life. And for us, that's what we do a lot too. Every day we wake up and we go work under the sun. We have earthly jobs. We have jobs that don't necessarily have a spiritual benefit to us. Most of them don't have a spiritual negative either, but we are working under the sun. We're doing physical and earthly jobs. And maybe Solomon's description of work sounds like the work that you do every day as well. Maybe it looks something like this. He says that you come home and you're exhausted because you've been working all day. You've been doing hard and physical and burdensome work. Maybe you can't shake the stress and negative emotions that you feel from work all day. He says that this is striving of the heart. It's sorrowful work that we're doing. On top of that, you lose sleep at night because you're still thinking about work. You're still thinking about the stress of the day. He says even in the night, the heart does not rest. And Solomon says that this kind of work doesn't just last for a little while either. It's not one bad day or a week. He says that all his days are sorrowful in verse 23. So work under the sun, it takes a physical, an emotional, and a mental toll all the days of our life. And that's the good news is that's the negative part of this, the end of this chapter here in Ecclesiastes. Maybe we're all hating work just as much as Solomon does right now because he's laid out all these complaints that he has about his work. But the good news is that we also have the first true positive passage here in the book of Ecclesiastes that we're going to go through here and talk about why our work, talk about the positive perspective of our work that is so much better than the under the sun perspective that we've spent all our time talking about so far. Section 4, Solomon, verses 24 through 25. Solomon says, "Nothing is better for a man that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. For who can eat or who can have enjoyment more than I?" And reading that back again, it may not seem like a very positive passage at all or some grand revelation that Solomon is giving here. And I might say, really, that's what's better than working under the sun every day is what he said here. The Christian Standard Bible translates this as, "There's nothing better for a person than to eat and drink and enjoy his work." You might say, there's nothing better than that. That's the conclusion of everything we've talked about. To us, that might sound a whole lot like a nihilistic or a really negative point of view. Paul writes something very similar to this in 1 Corinthians 15. He says, "If the dead do not rise, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." And Paul writes this here in 1 Corinthians to be purposefully negative. He's saying that if the dead don't rise, then we just need to chase pleasure. We need to eat and drink for pleasure because we're going to die anyways, and there's no point to anything. But the good news is Solomon doesn't mean that at all. There's a very different meaning that we find here in Ecclesiastes. Instead of giving up on life and saying there's no point of life other than just to eat and drink and die, he's starting to see what happens when you bring God into the picture in your life. This is the first time that God has been mentioned here in the book of Ecclesiastes in a positive light. He was mentioned in chapter 1, but Solomon says God has given this miserable task to men in the first chapter here. This is the first time that God is mentioned as a positive influence in our life. And it's what starts to make all the difference for Solomon here and starts to open up this positive passage. Notice again, the preacher or Solomon here says that this eating and drinking and enjoying of our work is from the hand of God. He says, "This also I saw was from the hand of God." So we're not talking about eating and drinking to forget about all this hard work that we're doing. It's not to wash away our sorrows, and it's not to simply chase the pleasure of eating and drinking. Instead, Solomon says, there's nothing better than to eat and drink and have joy in your work because it's a beautiful and it's a gracious gift from the hand of God. So we need to enjoy it. We need to take pleasure in it. But most of all, we need to be thankful for it because it's a beautiful gift from God. In his book, Living Life Backwards, David Gibson writes, "Some say eat, drink, and be merry because that's all there is. The preacher says eat, drink, and be merry because that's what there is. God has given us the good things of this world to us, and they are their own reward." And how often do you stop and think about that fact that God has given you life? He has given you all these things in your life as a gift that he wants you to enjoy. He wants you to enjoy food and drink. He wants you to enjoy time with your family and all these simple things in life. It's a beautiful gift that's been given to us from the hand of God. And most of all, he wants you to enjoy it. And we as receivers of this beautiful gift, we need to receive it with thankfulness and receive it joyfully. Paul writes something very similar to this in 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 4, verses 4 through 5, he says, "For everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, since it is sanctified by the word of God and by prayer." And Philip Ryken is writing about this passage here in 1 Timothy. He says, "Earthly pleasures are gifts from God. They have their limits, of course, so they will never give us eternal satisfaction, but the legitimate enjoyment they bring encourages us in the worship of God. Few things are better in life than to receive his earthly blessings as gifts and then return thanks to him." And that's what causes Solomon to say in verse 25, "For who can eat or who can have enjoyment more than I?" And why does he say this? It's because he's no longer looking at food and drink and work as he's no longer looking at those things for the meaning of life. He's looking at them for what they truly are. They are a gift from God to be thankful for. And eating and drinking is the easier part of that. That's really easy to enjoy and take as a gift, I think, in our lives. But don't miss that Solomon says there's nothing better than enjoying your work as well. That's not just the reward at the end of the day, the money or food that comes from that. It's the active process of working as well. That's a lot harder for us to do. The fact of the matter is God wants us to work. We're to be working people. And that's how it's always been from the beginning. In the book of Genesis, God created the garden and he put Adam and Eve in the garden, not to sit back and relax, but the Bible says that he put them there to work and to tend to the garden. And Solomon says that the good in the labor is from the hand of God. We can't receive the good for our labor if we're not laboring. And we can't receive all the benefits and gifts of God if we're not a working people. But that raises a hard question for us, and that's the title of our study. If work under the sun still feels burdensome, if it's still hard and sorrowful, how do we know that it's a good gift from God and it's not just wasted work that we're doing? How do we know that it's not pointless if it's still hard? And the key is to realize that the burden of work and the gift from God can exist at the same time. They can both be present in our lives. And Solomon is trying to show us that God entering the picture in our lives is what allows that to happen. For work to be both a burden in our lives, it's something that we have to do, we have to work, but it can also be a gift from God. But what changes? What's different when we're living for God instead of just living under the sun? The pain of work doesn't go away. It's still hard. Some days feel long and they're repetitive. They may even feel pointless to us. But what does change is our perspective. We begin to see that the value of our work isn't measured by profit or by dollars and cents, but instead it's measured by if it is pleasing to the God who gave us the work to do in the first place. The burden remains, but now it's accompanied by purpose in our lives. Conclusion number 5, when we stop looking at work as something we just have to get through under the sun and start seeing it as a gift from God's hand, it becomes more than just a burden, it's service to God. And again, we're still not talking about spiritual work here. We're not talking about spreading the gospel or working for the church. This is everyday work under the sun. This is the work that we do every day. Every day I go, drive to work, I clock in, and that's my work that I'm doing under the sun, but I can still work for God doing that. 1 Corinthians 10:31, Paul says, "Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God." Do your work for the glory of God. Don't do it for yourself. Don't do it to find the meaning of life like Solomon was doing, because as we've established, that'll just make you hate the work you do. Don't do it for money or for fame, but instead do what Paul says here in Colossians 3:23. He says, "Whatever you do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ." And at this point, we've started off this whole book, really, and this section of Ecclesiastes with Solomon asking, is there any real reward under the sun for all the labor that we're doing? And it's not until we bring God into the picture that we begin to find just a little bit of the answer of what that reward is here in the last verse of chapter 2. Solomon writes, "For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give to him who is good before God. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind." So Solomon says that God gives the reward of wisdom, knowledge, and joy to the one who pleases him. That's the one that's working for him. But to the sinner he gives the task of gathering and collecting, and as we've already established, he doesn't get to keep any of that. He loses it all in the end. That's the task of the sinner. And for the first time, we're seeing that wisdom is described as coming from God instead of under the sun wisdom. There's a big difference. We've been talking about human wisdom and knowledge, but now we see heavenly wisdom and divine wisdom for the first time. Solomon has been searching for this heavenly wisdom the whole time because it gives him the meaning of life. His eyes have been opened to the fact that he should be working for God instead of working under the sun. And likewise, Solomon mentions sin here for the first time. This is the first time that sin is directly talked about here in the book of Ecclesiastes. And he talks about sin because Solomon is beginning to realize that life with only an under the sun perspective isn't just burdensome and vapor, it's also the life of a sinner. The life under the sun is one that's separated from God and his gifts. And like Aaron talked about on Wednesday, the sinner that Solomon's talking about here is not someone that's simply ignorant about God. They're not someone who just doesn't know that God exists. This is a person that Solomon describes as a fool. This is someone who doesn't have eyes in their head. They've chosen purposely to walk separate from God and to work only for themselves under the sun. And they are walking separated from God and his gifts and rewards that we've been talking about. But what are these rewards? What is wisdom and knowledge and joy that he talks about? Well, wisdom here isn't just being smart like earthly wisdom would be. It's the ability to see life from God's perspective instead of the under the sun perspective. We begin to see what really matters and what the real meaning of life is. Knowledge isn't just about information. It's not about knowing fun facts and all that. We might say that it's knowing what really matters in life. That's enjoying the simple things in life, knowing what we're working for. And joy isn't just the momentary pleasure of earthly pleasures. This is a deep and lasting satisfaction that comes from a relationship with God. This is the joy that God gives. And God doesn't give these gifts if we work harder and clock more time at work. He gives these gifts freely from his hand to those that are walking with him and working for him. By contrast, the sinner here, Solomon says, the one who lives without God, he spends his life gathering and collecting, and he's trying to find meaning in his life through stuff and things. But he can't keep those things. The reward will never come for him because he doesn't get to keep everything that he's worked for. It slips through his fingers because it was never designed to satisfy or give reward in the first place. It was designed to perish. It was never designed to last like the knowledge of God will. But for the Christian, Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 15. He says, "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord." In conclusion this morning, I just want to quickly go through our main points and then I'll be done this morning. Conclusion number 1, hating life under the sun causes us to hate the work that we do under the sun. If we're simply chasing success in life, we'll never satisfy our souls. We'll never find meaning in life. Solomon had everything that he could ever want. He had more than I'll ever have in my life, but it all felt empty to him anyways. Looking for the meaning of life and work under the sun will just lead us to the same place that it led Solomon, and that's hating life and hating work. Number 2, everything that we work for does not belong to us. Using our earthly wisdom and earthly knowledge, that's a great injustice. That's unfair. We should be able to keep everything that we've worked for. But we can't find the meaning of life in our possessions anyways. God's wisdom shows us that we can't find meaning through possessions, and that's not what's going to matter in the end anyways. Number 3, the only thing worse than doing work under the sun that is profitless and pointless is doing hard, sorrowful, and burdensome work under the sun that is also profitless and pointless. Even the best job in the world will seem pointless and profitless if it's disconnected from the God who gives us purpose in our lives. David Gibson says, "What if our work was never intended to make us successful, but simply to make us faithful and generous?" Number 4, eat and drink and have joy in your work because it's a beautiful and gracious gift from the hand of God. Stop in your life and enjoy the simple things in life. God wants you to enjoy the gifts that he's given you, and they're given to you for a reason to enjoy them in your lives. Number 5, when we stop looking at work as something we just have to get through under the sun and start seeing it as a gift from God's hand, it becomes more than just burden, it's service to God. God's gift doesn't mean that work becomes easy and it's just a fun thing to do every day, but it does mean that we can have purpose in our work. Number 6, life with only an under the sun perspective isn't just burdensome and vapor, it's the life of a sinner. To reject God's presence and gifts is not just a tragedy, but it's sinful rebellion. But to those who follow him, he says that he'll give wisdom, knowledge, and joy.
Thanks for watching this video. I know what you're thinking. I don't want to miss another video from this channel. In order to avoid that, click on the red button down there, subscribe, and then click the bell icon. Not only will that alert you each time a new video is uploaded to the channel, it will also help spread the channel to other people's awareness. So, go ahead, do it. like right now. Click on it.